families, creating a lifetime of memories. Sadly, some families are denied these important moments due to the sad practice of alienation. These are families divided.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Families Divided TV. One repeated concern about establishing legal presumptions of shared parenting is that such presumptions put victims of intimate partner violence and children at risk of abuse. These are serious issues and they deserve serious evidence-based review. In this presentation, Dr. Don Hubin is going to present the best research we have on the connection between presumptions of shared parenting, intimate partner violence, and child maltreatment. This is a great episode. You're going to get much out of it. We're going to be right back in just a moment with Dr. Don Hubin right after this message.
Divorce and co-parenting are a major life interruption for families, especially the kids, but also for parents and grandparents. And it's even worse in blame-filled, high-conflict cases. When parents engage in alienation by turning the kids against the other parent or grandparents, kids suffer. They're denied the opportunity to build the 4 big skills necessary for future resilience. New Ways for Families online class can help. Parents learn to use our popular BIF and EAR skills to calm the conflict and stop the hostile emails and texts. And we even have a class for kids and parents to learn together. Research shows a 75% improvement in joint parental decision-making after this course is taken, plus overall improvements for kids' well-being. Don't wait to make this affordable investment in your children's future and improve your well-being too. Start learning new ways for your family today at conflictplaybook.com.
Hi, I'm Don Hubin. I'm the chair of the National Board of National Parents Organization. And today I want to talk to you about an issue that is increasingly important and increasingly discussed about the connection between shared parenting and legal presumptions of shared parenting and domestic violence and child maltreatment. So just a little bit about me first. In addition to being the chair of the National Board of National Parents Organization, I am a now retired professor of philosophy from The Ohio State University. I'm the founding director emeritus of the OSU Center for Ethics and Human Values, and most relevant to today's conversation, I'm the father of 3, the stepfather of 2, and the grandfather of now 6 grandchildren. National Parents Organization is the nation's largest and most effective shared parenting organization. We have chapters in 27 states. We work with state-based organizations in those states and in other states to advance shared parenting across the country. That involves changing laws to create legal presumptions of shared parenting, but also changing the hearts and minds of court professionals, judges, lawyers, custody evaluators, and educating people about the benefits of equal shared parenting. I describe National Parents Organization as being child-focused and research-based. And I mean by that we base our advocacy for shared parenting on the best research available about child well-being. Let me briefly give you an overview of what we're going to talk about today. First, I want to talk about what domestic violence is, what its forms are, and how prevalent it is. And then we're going to look at an allegation that shared parenting or legal presumptions of shared parenting increase the risk of child maltreatment. Then, to try to see whether that allegation is correct or not, we'll look at the actual evidence connecting shared parenting presumptions and child maltreatment. And then we're going to turn to the issue of intimate partner violence, and there look at the allegation that shared parenting increases the risk of intimate partner violence, and then we'll look at the evidence on that. And then to wrap up, I want to explain why we shouldn't be surprised by this evidence. And finally, why actually most people aren't surprised by the evidence. This is what I call the wisdom of the people section. Here it turns out that most people are really aware of what the research shows about shared parenting and conflict between parents. So first, what is domestic violence? Well, the legal definition of domestic violence varies from one state to another. In ordinary conversation, when someone mentions domestic violence, we think typically of intimate partner violence, the violence between two adult partners. But I understand domestic violence in a broader sense than this. The way I'm going to use domestic violence, it refers to violence between people who have an intimate, familial, or co-residential relationship, either at the time of the violence or before, where the relationship is essentially related to the violence. Now, there's a lot packed into that. I'm trying to be as broad as possible to capture everything we might consider violence in a domestic context. You might wonder why this last clause is here, where the relationship is essentially related to the violence. Well, the point is that if for example, one person mugs someone in an alley, not knowing who that person is, who the victim is, and the victim turns out to be someone they had a prior relationship with, that doesn't count as domestic violence. The point is that domestic violence involves people who are involved in a violent relationship because of this relationship that they have with one another. So as I use domestic violence, it includes not only intimate partner violence, but it also includes child abuse by a parent or a step-parent. It includes elder abuse. It includes abuse between siblings or step-siblings as well. Now, today we're going to be looking at intimate partner violence and child abuse and neglect. Researchers use the term child maltreatment to include both child abuse and neglect. We're going to focus on maltreatment by a parent or a step-parent or a partner of a parent or other adult guardian of the child. So we're not going to be talking about abuse by a stranger or by a teacher or a daycare provider or anything like that. While there has recently been a concerted effort to portray fathers as especially dangerous to their children, the statistics don't support this. So if you look at the data from the Department of Health and Human Services on domestic violence, you'll see that about 25% of child maltreatment is committed by fathers acting alone or with a non-parent. But about 45% of child maltreatment is committed by mothers acting alone or with a non-parent. And if you look at the data on child murders from the Department of Health and Human Services, about 15% of child murders are committed by fathers acting alone or with a non-parent. And about 40% of child murders are committed by mothers acting alone or with a non-parent. Now, I want to emphasize the point is not that mothers are more dangerous to their children than fathers. Mothers have physical custody of their children much more than fathers do, so they have much more opportunity to engage in maltreatment of the children. Mothers are also more likely to engage in violence towards children, including murder, under the influence of a new spouse or a boyfriend. So the point is not that mothers are more dangerous than fathers. The point is that we can't determine who's a safe parent by the sex of the parent. Now, what about intimate partner violence? Well, that includes violence between current or former spouses, unmarried partners, or other couples involved in an intimate relationship. This is both a very serious problem because of the severity that it sometimes takes, and it's a widespread problem. Approximately 1/3 of people will experience some form of intimate partner violence in their lifetime. Actually, some of the data show this to be considerably higher than that, closer to 45% of people will. Much of this violence won't be of the most severe sort, but it is very widespread, and some of it is very severe. There's a common perception of intimate partner violence that it is a form of patriarchal domination. The idea is that intimate partner violence is a tool used or almost used exclusively or almost exclusively by men to exert control over women. And this leads to a highly gendered conception of intimate partner violence. As two researchers put it in a paper, we use gender-specific terms because battering is not a gender-neutral issue. So that's a common perception, and it's one held even by some of the researchers. But that perception of intimate partner violence as being primarily or exclusively patriarchal domination of men over women doesn't explain several important features of the data. First, it doesn't explain intimate partner violence in same-sex relationships. And here's data from the Centers for Disease Control on the level of interpersonal violence In same-sex relationships. On this chart, we have the frequency of intimate partner violence for lesbian women as opposed to heterosexual women. And you will see that in every case, the frequency of violence for lesbian women is higher than that of heterosexual women. This next chart shows the frequency of intimate partner violence in gay relationships versus heterosexual relationships for men. And here again, you see that it is significantly, in this case, more prevalent among gay men than heterosexual men. So if intimate partner violence is really primarily about male domination over women, it doesn't explain what's going on in homosexual relationships. But it also doesn't explain intimate partner violence by women of men. And the CDC doesn't currently report the sex of the perpetrator of intimate partner violence, but it reports that prior findings have indicated that most female victims, and the statistic there is 97.1%, report male perpetrators. And most male victims, and there the statistics 96.9%, report female perpetrators. What this means is that we can make a good estimate of the sex of the perpetrator based on the sex of the victim. And so looking at the data from the Centers for Disease Control on the likelihood of a person experiencing sexual violence, physical violence, and or stalking. Comparing men and women, we can make an estimate of how frequently the perpetrators are male or female. So in this first slide, we see that the lifetime expectancy of a woman experiencing sexual violence, physical violence, and or stalking is 47.3%. The likelihood of experiencing it in the last 12 months is 7.3%. This next slide shows the likelihood for men. For the likelihood of a man experiencing sexual violence, physical violence, and or stalking is 44.2% in the lifetime. And in the last 12 months, it's 6.8%. Now, those charts are complex with a lot of data in them, so let's just simplify and look here, combining the frequency of victimization of each sex with previous data on the frequency of the perpetrator, that the perpetrator was of the opposite sex, we have these results. Female victims and male perpetrators in lifetime, we expect 45.9% of women to experience that. And in a 12-month period, 7.3% of women will experience such intimate partner violence by a male perpetrator. Male victims and female perpetrators in the lifetime, we expect 42.9% of men to experience this, and in a 12-month period, 6.5% of women. So there's a slightly higher likelihood that women will experience violence from a male partner, but it's not nearly as high as many people would assume. There's no doubt that some intimate partner violence is of the form of patriarchal control, patriarchal domination. But the research shows that most intimate partner violence is what's called common couple violence or situational violence. And often that violence is mutual. When it's one-sided in a heterosexual relationship, the woman is as likely to be the perpetrator as the man. But we shouldn't lose sight of this. Whoever initiates the violence, it is true that women are more likely to be seriously injured, even in instances of mutual intimate partner violence or common couple violence. Given those understandings of child maltreatment and of intimate partner violence, what's the connection to shared parenting and legal presumptions of shared parenting? One of the frequently repeated arguments against presumptions of shared parenting when the parents are living apart is that it puts victims of intimate partner violence and children at risk of violence or even death. So this is a very serious allegation, and it deserves to be looked at seriously based on the evidence that's available. Let's look first at child maltreatment. The allegation can be illustrated by a couple of quotes here. Last year, The Guardian ran a story. It was actually about a legislative effort in Ohio to create a legal presumption of equal shared parenting, the state in which I reside. And the headline was, U.S. child killings have risen rapidly. Why are more states pushing for joint custody laws? The story began with a horrible, tragic story of a father, divorced father, who had killed his children. This is a man who there was ample evidence was violent and was a threat to his children and to his wife while they were divorcing, his ex-wife after that. And the courts failed miserably in that case to protect the children and the ex-wife. But the story suggested that these sorts of instances mean that there shouldn't be shared parenting and there shouldn't be legal presumptions of shared parenting. An interesting fact about this story, the reporter asked this question, why are more states pushing for joint custody laws? The reporter never interviewed the legislators who had introduced that legislation, nor any of the groups that had advocated the legislation. So it didn't seem to be a serious attempt to explore why these laws were being pushed. But that's the charge that in this case, child killings are a reason why we shouldn't have presumptions of shared parenting. Here's a quote from two domestic violence groups in a handout that they produced arguing against presumptions of shared parenting. The growing body of evidence that children are being subjected to unsafe custody and visitation arrangements by family courts indicates that a presumption of 50-50 custody is likely to be harmful to the best interests of many children. So those are the allegations. Presumptions of shared parenting put children at risk. Now let's look at the evidence. Some of the evidence comes from Kentucky in comparison to other states. I'm going to compare it to the neighboring state of Ohio here. Kentucky enacted a presumption of equal shared parenting during temporary orders in 2017 and for final orders in 2018. Ohio has no statewide presumption regarding parenting time, and the overwhelming majority of counties use an every other weekend schedule. So National Parents Organization compared the data from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services on child maltreatment in Kentucky and Ohio. And here's what we found. Between 2017 and 2021, the number of children who received an investigation, or what the researchers call an alternate response, fell by 1.8% in Ohio. That's good news until you see that in the same time period, the number of children receiving an investigation or alternate response fell by 30.9% in Kentucky. The number of child victims dropped in Ohio by 2.5%. But in the same period of time, it dropped by 33.2% in Kentucky. That is a dramatic result. And the only thing that Kentucky did differently between 2017 and 2021 is to institute a presumption of shared parenting. And for those like me who prefer to see this on a graph, here's the graph showing the frequency of child victims in Ohio on this red line here, pretty much a flat line across here, and the frequency of child victims in Kentucky, which drops rather dramatically from 2018 on down. So that's some evidence comparing Kentucky to Ohio. We also have some evidence from Ohio because, as I said, Ohio has no statewide presumption of equal shared parenting, but Ohio statutes do require every local court to have a local parenting time rule. The idea that the legislators have here is this will function as a default when parents can't agree otherwise, and that's what many of the local rules say. They say when parents can't agree, parenting time shall be as follows. So NPO has evaluated and graded each of Ohio's 88 counties on their local parenting time rules. Most of the counties, and it's the overwhelming majority, it's in the 50 some out of 88 counties, have one of the old, outdated, every other weekend, one evening a week schedules. But an increasing number have presumptions of equal or nearly equal shared parenting. So to determine the effect of presumptions of equal parenting time on child maltreatment, NPO reviewed data from the Annie E. Casey Kids Count project and correlated these data with the parenting time rules in Ohio's counties. And what did we find? Well, the Ohio counties with equal parenting time rules saw a significantly lower and declining rate of child maltreatment compared to the statewide averages, and even more compared to the every other weekend schedules. Between 2012 and 2021, the frequency of substantiated child maltreatment reports per 1,000 children dropped by 4.78%, almost 5% in the every other weekend counties. That's good news. But statewide, it dropped by almost 14%. And it dropped by almost 55% in those counties that had equal parenting time schedules. And again, if you like me, like charts, here's a chart showing this. So the green line is the frequency of child maltreatment, abuse, and neglect reports in the counties that had a presumption of every other weekend and one evening a week. The blue line is the overall state frequency, and the red line represents the counties where there were presumptions of equal parenting time. So the available evidence, and it's always good to have more evidence, certainly, but the available evidence indicates that far from presumptions of equal shared parenting putting children at risk of maltreatment, such presumptions are protective of children. We don't fully understand why this is so. I mean, there are a number of hypotheses that one could test. It could be that by reducing conflict between the parents, it reduces the risk of child maltreatment, which might be sort of a spillover of the conflict between the parents. It could be that by keeping both parents involved in the children's life, there's a better chance of catching maltreatment before it becomes severe. Or it could be that by relieving the stress that sole custody can impose on the custodial parent, it reduces that parent's likelihood of mistreating the children. We don't know, but we do know that the data we see so far shows that presumptions of equal shared parenting not only don't increase the frequency of child maltreatment, they decrease the frequency. Whatever the explanation, it points to the well-being of children as a benefit of presumptions of equal shared parenting. Well, let's turn to intimate partner violence. And here the assumption is, the allegation is that presumptions of equal shared parenting put victims and potential victims of intimate partner violence at risk because it forces them to continue to interact with their abusers or their potential abusers. And let's look at the data here. Again, let's look at some data from Kentucky. Recall that Kentucky passed the presumption of equal shared parenting for temporary orders in 2017 and for final orders in 2018. In 2023, Emma Johnson, who heads up Moms for Shared Parenting, asked the Kentucky Administrative Office of the Courts for data cross-referencing civil, domestic, and family cases with domestic violence cases, in effect asking, how frequently do you have a case that is where the parties are in a divorce action here or a paternity action cross-referenced with domestic violence cases? Now, such cases were dropping significantly before Kentucky's shared parenting laws were enacted, but they continued to drop, and they dropped by more than 50% between 2017 and 2022. In 2017, there were 973 such cases. In 2022, there were only 454 such cases. And now you know I like the graphs, so here's a representation. You can see that the frequency of these cases that are both domestic violence cases and domestic relations cases was dropping significantly starting in like 2010. But from 2017 to 2022, it dropped by more than half. Perhaps the best evidence about the relationship between presumptions of equal shared parenting and domestic violence comes from Spain. Spain offers us a sort of natural experiment. One of the frustrations of social scientists is that you can't do what a chemist does in their laboratory of lining up a bunch of test tubes and treating each of them slightly differently to see what the effect is. Well, Spain gave us a sort of natural experiment of that form. So in 2009, between 2009 and 2011, 5 of the legislative regions in Spain passed custody reforms that increased joint physical custody fourfold in just 5 years. Researchers looked at the rates of intimate partner violence in those regions before and after the change, and with the rates of intimate partner violence in the regions that didn't enact such reforms. And what did they find? And here's what they found in their words. The presumptions of shared physical custody, quote, led to a large and significant decrease in intimate partner violence, with the largest effects among couples in which the mother was more likely to seek sole custody before the policy change. They also found that the policy significantly decreased domestic violence, with intimate partner violence falling by almost 50%. And finally, they found a significant reduction in the number of female homicides committed by intimate partners after the joint custody reform. And then once again, there's a graph showing this, and it's rather dramatic. Just to help you understand this graph, the red line represents those regions in Spain, the frequency of intimate partner violence, and those regions of Spain that didn't enact equal shared parenting laws. Those are called the control regions here, because they're the regions in which nothing was changed. And then the treated regions, the regions where there was a presumption of equal shared parenting instituted, are represented by the blue line here, and you can see a dramatic decrease in the frequency of intimate partner violence. So as with child maltreatment, the available evidence indicates that far from putting potential victims of intimate partner violence at greater risk, presumptions of equal shared parenting reduce the risk of intimate partner violence. Presumptions of equal shared parenting aren't part of the problem, they're part of the solution. Now, these data might come as a surprise to some people, but I don't think they don't come as a surprise to researchers. As Professor Edward Crook put it, I'm going to read a long quote here, bear with me. Winner-take-all adversarial processes and sole custody or primary residence orders are strongly associated with exacerbation or creation of parental conflict. Hawthorne and Lennings found that limiting fathers' involvement in children's lives via sole maternal custody judgments was correlated with their reported level of subsequent hostility towards their ex-wives. Interparental conflict decreases over time in shared custody arrangements and increases in sole custody arrangements. Interparental cooperation increases over time in shared custody arrangements and decreases in sole custody arrangements. Fully half of the first-time family violence occurs after separation within the context of the adversarial winner-take-all sole custody system. This is no surprise, given the high stakes involved. When primary parent-child relationships are threatened, the risk of violence rises dramatically. When neither parent is threatened by the loss of his or her children, conflict diminishes. The culture of animosity created by the sole custody system seems tailor-made to produce the worst possible outcomes when there are two capable parents who wish to continue as primary caregivers, cannot agree on a parenting plan, and are forced to disparage each other within the adversarial system in an effort to simply maintain their role as parents. So that's the way Edward Crook puts it, capturing the research of many researchers that show that the presumption of equal shared parenting actually increases parental conflict. But I said I was going to wind up talking about the wisdom of the crowd, and that's this. This is not news to the general public. NPO has commissioned independent polling by ResearchScape International, a respected polling agency, in 26 states on people's attitudes about shared parenting. And one of the questions we ask has to do with whether an award of sole custody increases or decreases parental conflict. And in every state that ResearchScape has done polling in, at least 70% of respondents said when there's conflict between parents, awarding sole custody of children to just one parent increases that conflict. For those who are concerned about intimate partner violence and child maltreatment, and that really should be all of us, right? The evidence we have indicates that far from raising the risk of these problems, legal presumptions of shared parenting are part of the solution to them. We know that conflict is bad for children. The conflict needs to be reduced, and one way to do that is to reduce the presumption of sole custody to assure both parents, as long as they are fit, loving, safe parents, that they will continue to be fully involved in the lives of their children. If you're interested in following NPO, we have a website, sharedparenting.org. You can follow us also on YouTube. Our YouTube channel is you'll find it under nationalparents.org. We have a Twitter feed and Facebook as well. We're easy to find. Thank you.
On our next episode of Families Divided TV, Dr. Susan Heitler discusses feeling mad, what's good about anger when it works against you, and how to turn it to your benefit.